is Dean of Research and Enterprise. He's from the University of Leicester in the United Kingdom. And so we will have like a 25, 30-minute presentation. Afterwards, we will have a discussion or a question period, but also the opportunity to interact and also share your comments, and for about another maybe 30, 45 minutes. So Matt, you can take it away whenever you're ready.
Great, no, thank you. I'll let me just share my screen. I'll get the IT working first. That's the most important thing. I think you should be able to see my slides. Okay, good. Yay, yippee. I mean, the first hurdle with anything like this is that the slides work. So I'm very pleased. Bonsoir, bonjour. Thank you very much for inviting me along once again to talk to you guys. And yeah, this is always a huge pleasure of mine. This is the third talk, I think, that I've done for La Fabrique, and this one is interesting because Jean-Christophe got in touch with me to say, could I talk about international performance? And I thought one of the things that has long interested me is, we can measure performance in many different ways, but the question is what you're measuring what you really wanted to measure, and are you getting the outcome that you really want to get? And that is at the heart of this particular talk that I'll do today. And actually the genesis of this, so I have a background in corporate entrepreneurship. So I was one of the first academics in the UK to develop a corporate entrepreneurship course. And a few years ago, actually during the pandemic, of all things, I was doing a talk on innovation and why is it that firms don't get the innovation that they want? Well, 9 times out of 10 is because their control system is killing what they actually want to achieve. And I realized a lot of those things carry over when you look at firm performance, because you've got to be really careful what you measure and it's not what you measure that's the problem, it's the signals that it sends that's the more important set of issues. And that's what I will try to outline in this talk. So yeah, as Jean-Paul mentioned, feel free to call me Matt. I'm the Dean of Research and Enterprise and also Professor of Innovation Entrepreneurship. I'm currently at the University of Leicester since beginning of 2023. So keeps me busy, keeps me in trouble. But anyway, all good. Right. Okay, so there's 3 sort of main passages, or 3 sort of phased message to this talk, really. One is that outcomes and results are not the same thing. So, what the firm gets as a result of individual behavior, that is its firm performance, may not necessarily be what it intends. So in that, oftentimes when we think that, we want to achieve a certain level of international performance, that might be expansion, that might be growth in international sales, it might be market share. That might be what we're measuring, but it's the question of, is that what we intended, and how are we actually steering individual behavior? Are they aligned? Normally, and this goes on to point 2, where they are not aligned, it's more often than not the control system and the reward system that is an important place to look. In other words, don't start by looking at your human capital, right? Your human capital, your people, are the end game. Right? If people are not delivering the behaviors that you are looking for, the first place to look is process. So you can think of this like the Swiss cheese model, right? So Swiss cheese has lots of holes in it. If you think of the person at the very end and you've got this big block of Swiss cheese, for something to go wrong, something has to go through all of those holes before they get to the person. Right? So if something goes wrong, 9 times out of 10 is the process that has gone wrong. Then one of my inspirations for that idea, where the Swiss cheese model is used more than anything, is in the airline industry, specifically in airline crashes. When stuff goes wrong, it's rarely ever the pilots that are to blame. It's the systems, whether the SOPs, the standard operating procedures work, whether the processes work, whether they were unable to make sense of the situation or had too much information. the last person you blame is the individual. If stuff goes wrong, it's usually before that. And so that's kind of part of the message I want to get over. The other thing that I want to emphasize, and this will become clear later, is that tight control is your enemy, not your friend. And I say this because this comes from my background in teaching and researching corporate entrepreneurship. I do not like tick boxes, where control is by, okay, you need to achieve this. Right? The reason why I don't like that is because once an individual meets those objectives and the boxes are ticked, any future responsibility is essentially exonerated. The future of the organization doesn't matter because they've ticked the boxes that you gave them. So that's another reason why I like to be cautious about the nature of control and what that means for firm performance. Because often we may, for example, reward 12-month profitability or 12-month international sales. That's fine. The only thing is that it's short term. It's focused on 12 months, which probably puts the emphasis on selling more of what the company already does, which means your salespeople will not be inclined to sell new products that you might be bringing on stream because there's more uncertainty and risk involved. So they may be growing your international sales, but be growing them around your existing activities, not around any innovations you're looking to bring on stream. So again, this is why that tick boxing and that time frame is really important. So I guess the real question is, when to first understand firm performance, especially international performance, you really need to ask yourself, well, what are we really measuring and what do we want to measure? By way of quick example here, Jean-Christophe asked if I could put in some examples. So I'm not going to point out specific companies and how they do things, but rather I want to point out some straightforward anomalies. So have a think about Tesla, for example. Now, I don't mean Tesla as it is now. Rather, if we rewind the clock over 10 years ago, actually about 15 years ago, when Tesla was first starting, Tesla, at the time, they were completely unprofitable. They did not have the market share that they do now. They were talking around 2010. Okay, so we're 15 years ago. Even in 2010, Tesla's market value was considerably higher than Ford, even though in that year, Ford had its most successful financial year in decades. So they were coming back off record profits and record revenue, yet the market valuation was a handful of a few billion. Tesla at the time was about 40 billion, something like that, right? So what's that telling you? Well, it's telling you that the profitability and the sales that they were making was not the measure of their success. The measure of success was their shareholder returns, their shareholder value, their long-term potential, their long-term worth. And, the passage of time has shown that Tesla were in a much better position than Ford. By the way, Ford, despite having that record financial year, sacked their chief executive officer, which illustrates the point, right? That you really got to think, what you're measuring, and is that measure aligned with what you want? Well, 12-month sales and profits, great, but it points to the now. It doesn't point to the future. Okay, so various ways of measuring international performance. There are lots and lots of options. What I've put on the slide here are just some examples of what we look at when we study international performance, for example. So we can look at quarterly financial outcomes. You can look at, how they're performing against quarterly estimates, or you can look at their annual financial outcomes, either international revenues and sales, profits, contribution, market share. You could then look at, actually, what's the change? So let's not look at the actual number, but what would be the change in revenue or sales or profits or market share, and see, okay, is there growth? You can then compare that to your industry. You could compare it to your strategic group of competitors. So all of those are variations of the exact same measure, looking at simply revenue or profits or market share. you could look at entry into regional or non-regional markets. So, for example, companies in Germany will naturally internationalize by just going over the border. So going to Austria, various other countries just around there that have either cultural similarities or linguistic similarities or what have you. But broadly speaking, internationalization can literally mean jumping over the border. Now, that is considerably less risky than if, say, the German business decided it was going to expand into Thailand or into Vietnam or into a distant region because the cultural differences are so much higher. So that is important to consider because both reflect very different types of international behavior. One is more conservative, for the want of a better word, going into neighboring markets where the risk is less, versus going into more distant markets where there are more substantial differences between the regional cultures, so to speak. A variation of that is multinationality. So you could judge success by being the number of overseas markets that have been entered. Yeah, because again, the larger the number of overseas markets, the more diversified the risk, and so on and so forth. So again, that is just as much a measure of international performance as looking at international sales. It just depends what you're trying to measure, what is your benchmark, so to speak. I'll get to why that difference is important in a minute. On the other hand, you could look at innovation. So you might be going international to expand your revenue and sales, but it might also be to gain a greater traction for your core product line. Yeah. So it might be that, are you going with a standardized product, or is it more customizable? Is it very different to what is already out there, or is it broadly similar? You know, what's the strategy? If you look at, let's take the rise of BYD, the electric car company from China. They could be looking at their international performance in terms of sales. However, I really doubt it. Their behavior is much more consistent with a tech startup, where what the tech startup is trying to do is gain large amounts of share or presence or traction, and then figure out how it's going to make money. So I think if we were looking at BYD, I don't think it would be appropriate to judge their performance based on how much revenue they're doing. I think that is a problem in 3-5 years' time. Their current issue is more about scaling really quickly into Europe, because it closes off the markets to domestic rivals, in particular, for example, the German car industry. So that is two different ways of looking at performance, but it tells you a lot about their strategy, in the sense that they are behaving much more like a tech startup. You know, we'll gain the ground first, then we'll figure out how to make money. Finally, the other way to look at this is you could look at in terms of shareholder value. You know, what are you doing to either make higher dividends or grow the share price of the company? You know, that might be, it's usually what the case when it comes to, I'm preaching to the converted here, I know this, but most of the time we have two real responsibilities when we're measuring performance. How well are we doing financially, because that speaks to the sustainability of the business, and two, how well are we rewarding our shareholders for taking the risk investing in the business? So really, there's always those two dynamic issues. But my point is, if you look at Ford and Tesla, they're not strictly correlated. Your market value your shareholder value, market value is more a reflection of your long-term health, even if your revenues are underperforming that as we currently speak. So again, it's that dynamic. So this raises, I would say, a couple of really important questions. The first is, what do you actually want and why? If you're measuring international performance based on international revenue, why is that? Why is the priority on growing international revenue? Why is it not on profitability or market share or the number of markets that you're in? Because again, we can have large international sales from one core market, but that means we're at risk. The risk is not diversified. So the first question is, what do you actually want and why? As a hint, the why should be informed by the strategy. And sometimes that happens, and sometimes that's senior management intention, but again, it fails because of control, and we'll get to that in a second. The next is, what is the purpose of measuring international performance and for whom? So this is why I deliberately brought up the issue of shareholder value. Senior management, at the end of the day, are ultimately responsible to their shareholders. So shareholders will want to see a growth in shareholder value. If it's a publicly listed company, that goes without saying, because they will want to see share price growth. But even if it's privately listed, the wealth of the company will need to increase to reward those invested in the business, be that even yourselves as entrepreneurs, or the family, if it's a family business, or minority shareholders or other shareholders involved in it. But again, what you're choosing will vary based on stakeholders and what you're trying to accomplish. A good example is, I use this in my teaching, is GoPro. Everybody know GoPro? They do those cameras that you can put on your helmets or your bikes or whatever. Now, GoPro grew at an astonishing rate, namely because its product was something that could appeal to mass markets, appeal to a particular generation. And so its growth skyrocketed on the back of that. But eventually that's going to plateau, right? And so it's a question of, okay, well, what comes next? So they were successful in the US, they grew internationally. Their mistake was not having a follow-up innovation. Why did they not have a follow-up innovation? Well, in part because they were fairly addicted to the revenues that were coming in from the GoPro product. So they were unable to innovate that next phase of their business. So this is, again, why I'm eager to have you think about different ways of measuring international performance, because if we're just focused on 12 months revenue, the easiest way to accomplish that is to sell more of what you've already got. And the easiest way to get more profits is to sell more of what you've already got without investing in risky activities or costs. And R&D, for example, would often be classed as a cost rather than an investment. And this brings me to exactly why I used the example of GoPro, which is, how do you keep the beat going? So in other words, if you have that growth, and with GoPro, it had, stratospheric growth, how do you keep that going? So sometimes international expansion is a solution to a stagnating domestic market. That is great, but you need to make sure that your product service is going to be healthy in that international market and not suffer from stagnation of its own. And this is why what's being measured is really important, because it signals to people what you value. And if what you value is 12 months sales, the easiest way to do that is to sell more of what you already have and maintain that profit. It's not to invest it in new activities or potential innovation. So it creates a slight dilemma, so to speak. By the way, if anyone's got any questions, you're welcome to ask as I go along. I forgot to mention, but okay. So this kind of brings me to the underlying point I'm trying to make, is that why might your measure not actually match reality? So this is because what you measure is the end game. If you are measuring international performance based on, let's say, the proportion of your revenue that's international sales, then the signal that sends into your employees is, what I want is more international sales from what I'm already doing. And that might be fine. That might be exactly what you want, but that's the signal that it's sending. The thing is, though, the measure doesn't determine how you get there. There are a variety of ways of growing, let's say, international revenue. You can do it by selling more, but it might also be that you want to enter the market with new products or variations of your products, so that you gain, create more of a buzz or a vibe around the business. And so you need to take a step back and look at, okay, what's the strategy saying? And does the strategy align with what we're measuring and the behavior that's taking us there? So again, think the Swiss cheese model. The behavior is the end game. what we're trying to do is determine how are we getting there, and is that what we want? Do they line up? So it's the business strategy and competitive needs that are crucial in this discussion in that sense. So again, if we look at BYD again, it seems obvious to me that their strategy is one of blitz scaling. What they want is get a lot of market traction very, very quickly, and then we'll figure out the profitability of it. It's a classic tech startup strategy. It's what most tech unicorns do, is exactly that. Get the traction, then we'll figure out the business model afterwards. The danger of that is, will that business model ever materialize? This is the problem we see with unicorns. However, if you're an established company in the marketplace, it's very difficult to switch into that mindset, because it often means doing things very differently, growing at a pace that the company might not be used to, or fundamentally changing its products and services, innovating it. And in which case, it might not be in a position to make that move. This is why, for instance, it was much easier for Tesla and BYD to take market share than it was for somebody like BMW, Ford, Mercedes to move into electric cars. I mean, for instance, Nissan, Renault have been among the pioneers when it comes to electric vehicles. If we rewind the clock again to 2010, why was that? If you look at who was investing in electric cars, it wasn't Ford, Mercedes, BMW, Volkswagen. It was Tesla as a startup. Toyota is the exception because they were market leaders, but also Mitsubishi, Honda, Nissan, and Renault. Those that were not market leaders, because they have an incentive. And that, again, speaks to strategy and therefore what matters for measuring performance. Just a slight segue on this. So I was talking to John Paul at the beginning and got a slightly interesting conversation, because we were talking about tools and strategies and decision making. Well, me and a colleague developed a tool to help entrepreneurs and business people to develop. It started off as a decision making tool, and we very quickly realized that it has 3 applications. One, how to improve decisions and to understand what's underpinning them and what you're really trying to accomplish. 2, they can be used to evaluate opportunities. And 3, it can be used to build strategies. So the green box you have on the screen here, this is actually parts of our tool. This is what I call the playing field. And the first thing then, when we take people through this tool, the first thing I ask them is, what do you actually want to accomplish? What decision are you making? So it might be, okay, we want to grow. Okay, great. So you want to grow. Why do you want to grow? So let's say we want to grow our international performance. Why is that? It might be because we want to expand into more markets, grow our revenue because we have a scalable product and service. So we want to get it out there. That's good. The other reason might be, actually, we want to grow because our domestic market is shrinking. So we want to grow internationally because we need to get out of our domestic market, or we need to reduce the reliance. Now, same objective, grow, but the end game, what you're actually trying to true outcome is completely different. And so what that means for your performance is also completely different, because it might be to do with growth, it might be to do with consolidation, it might be to do with de-risking the business, it might be to innovate. My point is, you need to decouple the middle bit, what you're measuring and what the outcome is, with what you're actually trying to accomplish long term. This is why I was saying, if you measure international performance based on 12 months profitability in those international markets, okay, but why? How is that feeding into your strategy, and how is that informing employee behavior? It also means that you need to think about prerequisites. For example, if we are growing into international markets and we want to increase that international market revenue, and that's what you're measuring, then you look at, okay, why are you doing that? But also, what do you need to have in place to enable that outcome to happen? Now, it might be that you need more expatriate managers, or you need to find agents on the ground if you're going with export models, or it might be that actually we want to go more greenfield in which case we need to look at our investment capabilities and how our operations will scale along with it. So I would encourage you guys to think about that chain in the middle, because it really helps to understand what am I measuring, and am I measuring the right thing to achieve what I'm prioritizing in my strategy. I just want to quickly, well, actually not quickly, but the next few slides, just talk a little bit about control. There are several different types. I'm going to cover a few of them on my next slides, but classically you have financial control, budgetary control, for example. You have what I call strategic controls. You measure outputs based on what you value in your strategy. You can look at behavioral control. You can literally look at how people are doing their jobs, how they're performing their jobs. Or you can look at the outputs that they are creating as part of that. Fundamentally, control is applied intentionally or unintentionally because they send signals. So any control measure I use sends a signal into the system as to, it pretty much tells employees what it is that I value. That's what the control system is essentially doing. This means that they also regulate what people do. For international performance, this is really, really important because it really depends on two things. What type of performance do you want? And it also affects pioneering behavior. So I'll get to this on my next slide. But for example, we all use financial control. We all have budgets, right? So, we set budgets for our business, or depending on its size, for departments or functions or what have you, but we always set budgets. So if the budgets or if financial control is the only thing that matters, so for instance, we use budgets, we prioritize, are those budgets met? We prioritize the financial return, we prioritize the profitability. All of those are sending signals to your employees that what really matters is the financial bottom line. It's not, for example, things like innovating. If your strategy is, I want innovation to grow my financial bottom line, then you've got to change the emphasis onto innovation. If the emphasis is on, oh, can you guys still see the slides? I'm spotting a few comments there. I'm just wondering if everything is okay.
We see the slides.
Okay, good. I was just seeing some comments in the chat box, and my French is rudimentary, but I could read some of the words, and I was wondering if that was a problem, but okay, good. I did study French at school, but I'm much older now. Okay, good. So anyway, financial control, I'll cut a long story short. We know from research in corporate entrepreneurship that relying on financial control reduces entrepreneurial behavior in firms. That's the bottom line. Now, that's interesting because I got into an argument once with an executive who said, yeah, but we cannot not have budgets. We must have financial control. My response was, I know, I never said you shouldn't have financial control. I'm simply saying that you should understand what that control mechanism will do. And if it's your only control mechanism, that's fine, but appreciate it will affect people's behavior. And so there are other types. So, for example, financial control, if you want to play safe, financial control is fine. And that might be exactly what you want. Grow international sales, grow the profitability by a tight management of your finances. That's fine. In which case, financial control is the way to go, and your ducks are lining up. My control system, my strategy, my outcomes, and my measure of performance are all lined up. But it might not be. Remember when that example, the playing field, I showed you that you might want to grow international sales, but you might want to be doing that because your domestic market is failing, or worse still, your products are failing in the domestic markets. You're going abroad to secure the revenues and use that revenue to invest in new innovations, in which case what you really want is new innovations. At that point, I would be much more emphasizing behavioral control and output control, because then you put the emphasis on, we want you to exhibit entrepreneurial behavior. This is how we're going to evaluate your job. This is what constitutes on-the-job performance, rather than just what is the financial bottom line. Equally, with output control, you can start linking that to strategy. So are you developing new patterns? Are you developing new product ideas, new service ideas? Are they being launched into the market? And what time frame is that? 1 year, 2 years, 3 years? So this is why, again, the type of control is critical, because it goes back to what you're trying to accomplish. Heavy financial control completely demotivates innovative risk-taking, because they're just not aligned. They're very, very different signals. So again, I'm not saying that any of these mechanisms are bad. All I'm simply saying is that have a think about how they inform individuals' behavior, because again, the Swiss cheese model, the behavior is what happens at the end. The question is, why is that behavior happening? And is that what we want? And does it line up with our measure of performance? So the nature of control is really important. It's essential not to punish mistakes. Think of it as guiding development. If the outcomes you're desiring are not aligning with the results, probably due to failure in the control system to begin with, I wouldn't rush to question my business strategy. I think it's tempting to think, okay, we got the strategy wrong. Well, no, the first place to look is slightly closer to home, to say, okay, are we actually incentivizing our employees to achieve the outcomes that we really want? So again, if we want to grow international sales, why is that? What is the logic? And it's that you're trying to fundamentally motivate. So focus on the strategy, not just the performance. Very quickly, I'll just quickly explain signaling theory. Signaling theory is one of my, I've never actually used it, but it is one of my favorite theories, that a signaler, let's say us as managers, we make decisions, we act in certain ways, we set controls, we set the measure of performance. That sends signals to our employees. Now, the employee receives that signal, but has to interpret what we mean. And so this is why it's so critical to think carefully about how we were measuring international performance, because again, what the performance measure we might be using at the end of the day is a blunt instrument. It might be an outcome that we want, but it doesn't tell you how we get there. So we need to think about, okay, what signal is the measure sending and what signal is the control and reward system sending? And because the receiver, the employee, has to interpret that. Separately, I didn't mention this in my slides, but very recently there's been an idea called hierarchical erosion. I wish I knew the French term for it, but so the easiest way to describe it is if we think of a business as a hierarchy, right? The top managers at the top completely understand strategy. The job of the middle managers is to translate senior management strategy to lower level employees. But hierarchical erosion is that the bigger the distance between senior managers and lower level employees, the more the confusion about what the strategy actually is. So your middle managers are really important in communicating the strategy so that these signals are received the way you want them to be received. I flag this because a lot of companies are taking out middle managers, which is okay, but as a cost reduction exercise, it's introducing this erosion problem that your lower level employees may not understand what you're trying to achieve strategically. So from a purely blunt point of view, what they will do is, well, how is my performance being measured? If it's being measured based on 12 months international market profits, then I want to reduce my costs and sell more of what I'm already doing. If your strategy is to innovate, then those things compete. And this is why this is lining up those things up is so crucial. There's a caveat here, which is that external actors can cause problems. So if you have activist investors or regulators, even markets, they can muddy those signals. But I just thought I would put that there as a kind of a note. Similarly, what we're really interested in here is the internal signals. What do senior managers portray? What does the reward system portray? What does the control portray? What does the measure of performance portray? Some notes on aligning control and rewards. I'm not going to go through these. They're fairly straightforward. I'll point out a couple of slightly odd examples. Again, as I mentioned, be quite careful of financial control, but I'm not advocating to eliminate financial control. I understand that all businesses need it, and I know that full well. The difference is how you apply it. So if you look at Samsung, for example, one of the things that Samsung do is they encourage their employees to innovate costs out of the business. For example, by simplifying the number of parts in the product, or improving the materials used, or improving the efficiency of it. So you can innovate costs out of the business. So you can use it as an incentive rather than a judgment, if you see what I mean. BMW is a curious one. They have something called the creative error of the month, where to celebrate creativity and innovating, even if somebody makes a mistake, but their innovative idea was interesting, they will celebrate it, for example. So that's just a way of, okay, we have financial control, but we're going to also celebrate other things to send signals. Here's some examples to illustrate the difference. This is actually, I think, pretty important. So for instance, short term is if you could emphasize, how are we performing against quarterly financials, or what's our 12 months sales or profitability? Are we sticking to annual budgets? Those are short-term measures, so they orient the individual to that period of time. Especially if you want to grow international performance by innovating or renewing the business, you really want to look at a bigger, longer-term measure. So for example, 20 to 30% of your sales to come from new products in 3 years. Or it could be 30% of our sales to come from new international markets in 3 years. That creates a longer-term horizon, creates a goal and objective, but also loosens the reins, so to speak, so that we are not just obsessed with the here and now, that we are opening up that horizon, so to speak. This can be really helpful to help achieve some kind of strategic change, or particularly, if we want to diversify away from a domestic market that's declining, or to give ourselves international growth to bring in the revenue that we're going to use to fuel new research and development, for example, or new innovation activities. So, in the difference between the short term and medium term, for example, is the short term measures pretty much relegate innovation to just hitting financial targets, whereas the other one opens up the window of responsibility, and therefore it becomes more focused on innovating or growth or changing the dynamic of the business. This is a quote that I really like from Morris and Krakow. It's actually this. I'll highlight the two key bits. Where you have an elaborate system of controls, all the employee has to do is comply by those controls, and then their responsibility is absolutely absolved. If their target is to meet a certain budget or meet a certain performance threshold, once they've hit it, that's it. And like I said, if you want to grow sales, and I know this because one of my PhD students is doing research into why do products salespeople not emphasize the selling of new products? Well, oftentimes it's because the system is gearing them to simply hit this financial target. And if I've done that, it doesn't matter how I get there. It doesn't matter if I sell more of the same thing or new stuff. As long as I hit that number, my responsibility is totally absolved. So sometimes you have to give up a degree of control by using mid to long-term targets and more semi-ambiguous, more responsibility-focused measures as a way of achieving what you actually want to achieve. So yeah, striking a line through the tick box. Final thoughts then. Firms must have processes that encourage people to actively think about the organization's future. This is why I decided to title this session The Mirage of International Performance. You could be doing really well right now, but how is that gearing your business to where you need to be in a few years' time? And it's that alignment that's so critical. What is your measure emphasizing versus what your strategy really wants out of your employees? That means that what you measure is not always what you get, and certainly not necessarily what you want, because again, we can achieve a growth in international sales, for instance, as a measure, but what if the real end game is to diversify, to exit the domestic market, or to sell new products, or to innovate? You know, it changes the calculus. And then finally, controls are still necessary, but I would really encourage a mix, depending on, again, what it is that you're trying to achieve. And there we go. I think I covered quite a bit of ground there, but I hope you found that interesting, and yeah, happy to throw it open for discussion. So thanks.
Yes. Thanks so much, Matt. It was a very insightful presentation.
Thank you.
And lots of information to discuss. And so it's now a question period, or discussion period. Any comments, any questions? That's we're looking forward to your interactions.
Yeah. By the way, one thing I should emphasize, you know, don't take anything that I just said as meaning there is a single right way and there's a right or wrong. It's not. You know, we all know that there are multiple ways of getting to the end game. I think what I was trying to demonstrate was the variety of the measures, but also why, when you're measuring something, you might not be priming the business in the way that you actually hope to prime it, and you know, thinking with a long-term hat on.
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
Yeah.
There's Jean-Christophe that has a question.
Yeah, I have a quick question. Thank you, Matt. You mentioned sales, financial objectives, and metrics. How about, I would say, more subjective metrics like brand, brand awareness, brand image? Can you discuss this, please?
Yeah, sure. No, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think I had brands down there, but I didn't actually drill into it. So yeah, exactly. So this ties back to some of the examples that I gave. So taking a new brand, so taking an established brand in one market into an international market is a very interesting dilemma, because you've got what does the brand mean in that international market? Will the iconography, will the brand wording carry over into the international market? So assuming it does, there are various ways of measuring that performance. One could be, okay, so how quickly does it develop awareness in the market? So, you know, you measure it based on market awareness. That can be done by subjectively measuring brand awareness among customers. It could be how fast of a traction or a foothold it gets, or it could be brand value. So, okay, we introduced the brand. How quickly does it become a valued brand relative to others in the marketplace? So that can be done. Those are two measures off the top of my head. The interesting thing about brands, there are some classic examples of where a brand created in one market doesn't necessarily carry into another market. So the car company Vauxhall, in the UK, we know it as Vauxhall. The rest of the world, I think, is Opel. Opel had a car called the Nova, or the Vauxhall Nova, which is Nova is a space-related term in English, typically. So they took it into Spain and achieved very few sales. The reason being no va in Spanish means no go, which for a car is obviously not what you want. But
Right.
you know, that's an illustration. I don't know the legacy of why well, I think Vauxhall was a UK brand and then they got bought by GM as well as Opel, so then became one big company. But I don't know why they didn't change the name, to be honest with you. But you know, sometimes you've really got to consider what does the brand mean there, and again, what are we trying to accomplish? Are we trying to create brand value, in which your case your strategy will be more focused on the brand experience? If what you're trying to measure is brand awareness, your strategy is going to be focused more around more of a blitz type of marketing campaign to raise awareness of the business. So again, two very different options. You know, if we look at Aldi and Lidl, when they internationalize, it's very standardized. Same name, same iconography, same stores, same store layout, generally the same strategy in terms of Aldi and Lidl are clever for two reasons. One, they compete on price, but they create the illusion of choice. So the size of an Aldi or Lidl store is significantly smaller than a supermarket or a hypermarket, you know. But because they rotate their weekly or monthly offers and their suite of, you know, I would say, I'm tempted to say specialist products, it creates the illusion of choice. So from a brand building perspective, they've been very clever at, when they're internationalized, at developing a brand awareness around low price, but at a medium level of quality with a surprisingly higher than expected level of choice. Normally, markets will assume low cost equals low quality. So their advertising around brand building is to break that equation in the mind of the consumer. So Aldi and Lidl are actually a very interesting example because they do have lower price relative to the others. They're consistently lower, but they have the illusion of choice and they have mid-level quality. So it's quite interesting. Hopefully that answers your question, JC.
Thanks, Matt. Actually, my first car was a Nova, so that's a way back in the 70s.
Did it go?
Yeah, pretty well. It was pretty, but it was GM at the time.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
thanks. Any other comments? What I find interesting in this is that, as you mentioned, it's pretty much all focused on, you know, what we're looking at is the financial metrics and when you conduct, we did a study and to realize we discovered that there are what we call extra financial gains by carrying out international business. Like, you know, you gain sustainability, you cross borders and different life cycles, and so you can sustain your business this way.
Yep.
Or it could be ingenuity, because you learn a lot. You can import new technologies, knowledge, and everything. So that's another type of game, which is extra financial. So
Yeah.
we haven't gone as far as developing some, you know, metrics to do that. But it allows me to, you know, this presentation, I think it enables companies to harness all the other possibilities
Exactly.
of international.
I mean, what I would advocate is for a multi-dimensional measure of international performance, rather than pinning it on especially on purely financial, is to expand beyond that to brand or to sustainability or to innovating. Thanks, everyone. What you just said reminded me of something that I didn't mention. There is a growing idea called reverse innovation, where you expand into international markets, particularly emerging markets. You learn there and you adjust and you develop new products suited to those emerging markets, but you then realize that they hold value back in your domestic market and you reverse the flow of innovation. Because normally innovation is we innovate, we take it that way. Reverse innovation is actually, no, we've entered these markets, we've innovated, now we're going to bring it back to the domestic market. So yeah, reverse innovation, I've just realized is good fits really
Right.
well with what you've just said. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good point. You import that new adapt. Not actually. You go from scratch. You develop a new
Yeah. So, for
device.
instance, I'm guessing it's similar in Paris, but in many cities in the UK, you get bikes that you can hire. They're just on the side of the street, and you can, use your smartphone to unlock it, or you pay something, and you can unlock the bike and ride it. That came from China.
Mm.
It came precisely because the
Oh, yeah.
innovation worked there, and they learned and realized actually we could do with
Right.
this in some
Exactly.
of our cities, and so that was a classic example of reverse innovation.
Right. And under similar conditions. There's also Sylvia that wants to raise her hand.
Cool.
Sylvia?
Hi, Sylvia.
Hi, Matt. I'm sorry, I'm not in the office. I'm outdoor. But
that's
I have
nice.
a question of, yeah, I'm in a park. Look. Thank you very much for your webinar, and it was very, very interesting. The question I have is about this mirage and how to find a solution for that. Like, how can businesses and people and teams prevent that problem?
Yeah.
So do you think is it more a problem of finding the right indicators, the right things to measure, or is it more a problem about the tools to use?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. No, I'm glad you asked that question, actually. So the mirage for me occurs not because whether an indicator is right or wrong. For me, the mirage occurs when the indicator is not aligned to the strategy. So for me, that is the first starting point, is to say, okay, if we are measuring international performance in this way, the mirage will occur in two ways. One, is the measure appropriate for what our strategy is really about? Now, most of the time, this is why I would advocate for a blend of measures or for a multi-dimensional set of measures, because then you cover the scope a bit more. So I think the first port of call is not whether or not the measure is right or wrong, but the extent to which it aligns with the strategy. The second issue that I would say is the company or the management not being clear on what it is that they are really trying to accomplish. It might be that their strategy is to achieve international growth, but there needs to be a step back to say, okay, well, why are we trying to accomplish that growth? Because again, that then becomes a strategy failure, because if we haven't thought about why we want to achieve the growth, then the way you go about achieving the growth is going to be different. So again, this is why I was saying, okay, if you want to grow because your domestic market is at risk, that's a very different approach than we want to grow because we have this innovation and we need to capture, we want to capture the market before our competitors do, in which case you want scale very quickly, and in which the actual revenue made, profits made, is less of an issue, because what you want is enter as many markets as quickly as we can to get traction. And then I think Jean-Christophe's point about brand kicks in, because you want to establish that brand very quickly, and hence, typically what tech unicorns do. So I think I would say the mirage occurs not because the measure is wrong per se, but because the measure is not aligned with the strategy and the real end game. And then the third element of the mirage comes from what signals is it sending to your employees, and is that actually what you want to send? It may be that Thomas' financial performance is exactly what we want, and that's exactly the signal we want to send. But it could also be that that's part one of our strategy to consolidate the revenue that we need to use to fuel innovation activity, in which case you then need a separate measure to capture, okay, to what extent are we innovating. So I think that disentangling those three things is the solution to the mirage, and that's why the mirage, in my mind, occurs in the first place. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Thank you very much. It's a great answer. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Sylvia. Thank you.
So it all boils down to alignment, actually. It doesn't.
Yeah, it's an alignment issue in my view. And I mean, for me, Jean-Christophe's invitation was intriguing because I've had this in the back of my mind concerning innovation for years. I've been actively teaching this from an innovation point of view, but this is the first time that I started to think, actually, let's apply it to firm performance and see what happens. Because I have been concerned for some time that, for instance, when we measure firm performance for academic studies, for instance, what we don't actually know is what was the goal of the business. So we often use financial proxies to measure a firm's performance. But what we don't actually know is, well, what were they actually trying to achieve? What was their goals? For instance, one of my current studies, we're trying to look at how fast did the firm become competitively viable. So we don't want to just look at what revenue they're making, how fast did they get there? So the time is the variable. That's what we're interested in. And for those kind of like tech startups, I use tech startups, but again, look at BYD. That's not a tech startup per se. They're international. Thanks, Virginie. But that strategy is the speed at which they get into markets. At which case, it's the speed that's the issue. That's your measure of performance. It's the scale and speed rather than the financials. So if we were looking at BYD from a financial perspective, we are kind of missing the point. And yeah, Sylvian is right in his comment there. It is the KPIs. And the KPIs is the most important thing for alignments because they send all the signals fundamentally, especially to employees. So we go back to why I use the Swiss cheese model. Oh, I should have said French cheese, but I'm not sure how many high quality French cheese have lots of holes in them. So. But anyway, you get the idea. It's the alignment of those holes that allow for something to get a problem to make it all the way through, and then individual behavior isn't what we expect. But I would start with the process, not with the outcome.
Time horizon for that, very important. Other questions or comments? What I found interesting also is that, well, what it suggests is that you may have competitors, but it doesn't mean that you necessarily need to follow their metrics and compare with them directly, because you like BYD, they're in the same industry, but it's like it's a newcomer in the market, and perhaps they must follow other metrics or other signals to compare, because it's there's this liability of foreigners. They come into the market, so they might have other metrics to look at.
Yeah, I think a good example of that is if I look again at Nissan and Renault. So when they were introducing electric cars, the Nissan Leaf is the one that jumps into my mind. I can't remember what the name of the Renault one was, but the point is that if you look at their international performance, there's two ways of looking at it. One was how much revenue they were making. I think that misses the point. The reason why Nissan and Renault went early into investing in technology is because they were not going to become market leaders in the automobile industry by doing the same as everybody else. So they had the incentive to look at new technologies as a way of leapfrogging their competition. Now, if you were BMW or Mercedes or Ford or Volkswagen, you don't have that incentive because you're already among the market leaders. So they are incentivized to protect that market share. So if we take Volkswagen, in all honesty, it was no surprise that the diesel emission scandal happened. It happened exactly because their strategies geared them to defend what we are doing. Any strategy textbook would have said the same thing, not break the law, but it would have told them, defend where your success is, defend your capabilities, in which case, they will consolidate around what they're doing. Nissan and Renault and Honda and Mitsubishi, Tesla, they had the incentive to do something different because they're not going to beat Volkswagen at their own game. The only way to do it is to innovate their way around it. And so I think that's a useful example to illustrate if we were just looking at their financial performance, it would miss the point. What you really want is the change in market share, or even to go back to Jean-Christophe's example, it could be how fast did they establish their brand identity in this new market segment of electric vehicles, for example. So yeah, that's a thought.
Yeah.
Sylvia.
Sylvia, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, can you hear me well?
Yep, all
Yes.
good.
Okay, it's a question that is related to your answer about the importance of the why and to measure really the why and the objective, and also is related to what Jean-Paul said, and there's the kind of differences between the strategy of each company. And my question is, in your experience about these measuring international performance, do you know if there are or if there is one country or other countries that are having like an approach that is closer to this why than others? Because my experience, for example, is that in many occasions, especially when you work with SMEs, and I would say it's also my experience here in France, but maybe I'm wrong. And so in the case of SMEs, there is a lot of like opportunistic international development, international business by opportunities.
Yeah.
And therefore, when they are about to measure their international performance, they do what Jean-Paul says, like they're going to measure what everybody else is going to measure, which is not very useful, it's not very interesting, and it's not very effective. But okay, so that is my here, and I don't know if you know if there are other countries that are different and if they are more into this kind of why approach than it is to measure international performance.
My sense is that the vast majority follow the exact example that you described, that it tends to be more focused on traditional financial measures. There's a few reasons for that. I'll start with large companies, then I'll end up on SMEs. So with large companies, it's usually because the markets, the financial markets and the investor markets put pressure on them to finances. This is why, I'm not going to say abandon those measures, because I know they're necessary to report to investors and to demonstrate how well the company is performing. And, that's shareholder wealth is how the CEO is going to be measured against. Now, with SMEs, then it becomes an interesting question, because it's probably an isomorphism problem in the sense that they don't know how to measure it any differently. So they do what everybody else does, and that speaks exactly to what you're saying. The oftentimes they internationalize in opportunistic ways because a client, I'm also in France and I would like to bring your product into France, or I'm in Germany, I would like to bring your product into Germany. And so you often have this kind of like opportunistic pull into overseas markets, and then sometimes it will cascade from there. But again, I suspect it's going to still be standard measures. Where I think there may be differences is those companies in emerging markets that are going abroad. I think that's where the difference will be, because this is just my sense, but looking at the way a lot of the Chinese companies behave when they go abroad, I don't think actually, I know it's not financial optimization. Sometimes we know that Chinese companies go abroad to acquire assets. It's not just to enter an international market, it's to actually acquire assets and technologies in overseas markets. That's the measure of success. And then they create a foothold, then they establish their brand, then they can scale it financially. But in many instances, the initial entry logic is to, okay, we want to get some assets and get some technology and start, getting the brand foothold. So I think this is why I think BYD is very intriguing to me, the speed at which they've done it. And yeah, this is just the speed at which they've translated their brand into the international market has been very interesting to me. But yeah, for sure, a lot of companies will do it that way. But I think it's it almost goes back to, okay, what is the incentive? In Western economies, typically the incentive is a financial one because of the system has programmed that into businesses. But I think when you're from an emerging market going abroad, the logic can be different. So what I'm suggesting is that we need to broaden the why in that sense. Hope that helps.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks, Sylvia. Stefan.
Hello.
Bonjour.
Bonjour. Don't you think it's also different? It depends on also who are the owners of the company. I think it's different. It's when it's a business family business,
yes.
or
yeah, agreed. Yeah, yes, yeah. I deliberately did not dip my toes into that one. Yes, couldn't agree more. So I wear lots of different hats. So inside the walls of this college of business, I'm the dean of research and enterprise. I'm also professor of innovation entrepreneurship, but I'm also Schultz Distinguished Professor of Family Business. So I'm glad you asked me that question. I'm also editor of familybusiness.org, which is the world's largest free resource for family businesses, and our sister website is Entrepreneur and Innovation Exchange. I'll put that in the chat box while I answer your question. So, okay, your question was, will different types of firms measure or behave differently? Yes, absolutely, 100%. And family business is a very good example. Family businesses are interesting because they do not behave like what we might think of as typical businesses. The reason being that they are not purely motivated by the financial motive, largely because they don't necessarily respond to outside investors per se. Even when they have minority investors, we know that they are not the priority. The family is the priority. Now, this leads to two types of issues. One, the financial wealth matters because the financial wealth accrues to the family, and that grows the family wealth. So in many ways, the wealth of the family is tied in the wealth of the business. So that matters. The thing is that they also value what we've come to call socio-emotional wealth, or non-financial wealth. Things like their ability to keep control over the business, their ability to hand it over to future generations, their ability to control and have decision rights over the acquisition and disposal of assets, their ability to maintain and reinforce family relationships, which is why they make unusual hiring decisions in some cases. And there are others, but those are the core of this social emotional wealth. So because of that, you're right, they will not necessarily prioritize the financial. We do know from research that family firms are willing to tolerate a short to medium term financial loss if it means protecting the family's interests in the business, especially their control over it and their ability to pass it on. So that does change their behavior. And so it's often said that family businesses have a longer term horizon. So because of that, they should be thinking longer term. But at the same time, there's a separate set of research that indicates that they underinvest in innovation. But then there's a subset of that research that shows that while they underinvest relative to others, they get more innovation output per euro put into it. So yeah, there's a mix going on in there, but it's really interesting. I think so. Yeah, even my own research for the Family Business Foundation in the UK, what we found is that they tend to prioritize what I describe as safety net innovation. Improve the quality, reduce the cost, add features, do what you're already doing better, rather than investing in new groundbreaking innovations. There will be, for the want of a better word, they're going to be late followers or second, third followers. They're not going to be the pioneers. Not always, but that's often a difference in their innovation strategies. So yeah, I agree with you that they are going to think differently beyond just the bottom line, depending on what's affecting the family, I think is a good way of summarizing that. Great, thanks. By the way, I put a link to I put familybusiness.org and EI Entrepreneur and Innovation Exchange in the comments. Do take a look.
I will share. I'm going
websites.
to share my screen.
Sure, yeah, please do.
Yeah. Let me what? No, it's this one.
Yeah. So that's EIX. That's Entrepreneur and Innovation Exchange.
I think also the other one.
Yeah,
probably this one.
Yes, familybusiness.org. That's the one. Yeah, and we are, constantly expanding internationally. So, if you want to reach out to us with commentaries or articles on what's happening in France, by all means do so. We have a really good team that can, we have templates that you can fill in, and then we will basically work with you and do the rest. So, yeah, please do reach out to us. We're last year, between both websites, we had over 15 million visitors. This year, we're going to break that this year. I know we are. We're on track to. We've almost broken it already. So I know we're on track to break that. So
congrats.
Yeah. No, thanks. I think from memory, EIX had 9 million visitors, and we had something like 5 million. But we're going to break that this year. So.
Oh,
impressive.
Yeah, so actually, on that screen there, you've got that top right article. That's the effect of family business of the UK economy. It's one of people that I know in the Family Business Foundation. They had done the report. They just did a short summary article, and we published it. So it would be interesting if you guys have got anything similar on, and it can come to family business. It can go to EIX. Anything to do with international behavior. It doesn't have to be family business, and that can go to EIX. So do reach out to us. We're always interested.
Thanks a lot.
Might help also raise awareness of La Fabrique as well, because we do credit where it's coming from.
Yeah, I betcha.
Okay.
Great, lovely.
Okay. Any other comments or questions? I'll share.
Génial.
That's it. So I don't know if Stéphane would wish to maybe announce a future event or.
Sorry, I think I don't have the date.
Okay.
Maybe Christophe.
I can do.
Or Sylvia.
No, I can do it.
Yeah.
Well, I can do it. Well, I can give you an appointment for April the 8th. And we're going to have a new webinar, but we didn't finalize the title yet. But you can mark the date on your calendar, April the 8th. Okay.
Good. That's a Tuesday from memory, so that's good. Okay, lovely. Yeah, no, thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Matt. I'm gonna get in touch with you about this website you mentioned.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Sylvia. I appreciate it. Thank you.
And probably we could share your website on our website.
Good. Yeah, no, that'd be lovely. We're happy to link the material through as well. So that'd be good. No, thanks again for the opportunity to speak with you guys. It's always a pleasure, and really grateful to you. I know you keep a vibrant set of webinars going. If you need me to recommend anyone, I'm happy to do that. And obviously, if you want to call on me again, you know where to find me. So, I believe I sit on the Scientific Council, but Jean-Christophe's got my number anyway. So, thanks very much.
Thanks to you, Matt. It was impressive, very interesting, very insightful.
So. I appreciate it. Thanks, Eric. Eric, it's nice to see you. It's been a while. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Take good care.
Okay, take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot, Matt. Bye.
Bye.